Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm Eric Kimberling here with Priest and Noble. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, listen to us on various podcast platforms, including Apple, Google, Spotify, Pandora, etc. And you can also catch us live every Wednesday on YouTube at 10 a.m. Eastern in the U.S., 3 p.m. London time, and 11 p.m. Hong Kong time. So I'm excited for our next guest. Our next guest is the VP of IT for a very large beverage manufacturer. More specifically, they make alcohol, spirits, wines, and then beverages of that sort. So a type of company that's right up my alley. I mean, and my wife too. My wife actually loves a lot of their product, a lot of their wines that they own. She's a fan of. So I know she's listening in and interested in this. But more importantly, as a someone that just is trying to understand transformations, they've been through a multi-year transformation that we've worked with them on over the years. And joining us on the show today is Tarak Patel. He's a VP of IT at the company. We're going to leave the company name out of it just for confidentiality reasons, but excited to have him on the show. So Tarak, welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Appreciate having you here today. So you've recently been involved in a large transformation of sorts, one of the more complex ones, I would say, in the world. But maybe just to start out, tell us a little bit about your company, what you guys do, how many employees you have, that sort of thing.
Yeah, sure. So we are a company based in alcobev space. We make alcohol and beverage products. Roughly about 5,000 plus employees. One of the bigger one out there in the market from an alcobev perspective. Company is very well positioned for growth and was the case when we started the journey. However, when you think about the process and technology landscape, was fairly aged. No longer the case, but when we started the journey, right, think of it as 15 to 20-year-old technology and process landscape that was implemented, when company operated with less than 200 SKUs, right? And in this day and age, we were operating it with, thousands of SKUs. Had a very strong ambition to double the size of the company or grow the revenue aggressively. And it was becoming very clear at the time that the only way to do that is to sell something we don't sell or sell somewhere or to someone that we don't sell, right? So the company has a very high market share in the US. So it was very evident that the growth was going to come through, topics like M&A, global expansions, which in sense requires tremendous amount of flexibility, scale, and agility in your operating model. You need to be able to sell things that you don't sell to locations you don't sell into. You need to buy anything from anywhere. You need to make anything anywhere and sell anything anywhere, right? And that type of growth trajectory was really hindered from speed and cost perspective had we continued to operate on the old technology and process landscape.
Sure. Okay. And was there any sort of tipping point that you reached in your journey there that I'm sure it didn't just happen overnight, but was there anything that triggered you to say, hey, it's time for us to go revisit our landscape and really build in that agility and update our technology and all the stuff you just mentioned?
Yeah, well said, right? So there were really two tipping points from what I can see, right? The one was very evident. Technology was a tipping point. We used to operate on J.D. Edwards that was implemented in early 90s, still on AS400 landscape. And, if I use this a lot in my analogy, but that system had 2 million lines of custom codes that was built over time, right? It was very customized, and it became evident that at one point in time, if we needed to switch a hardware, we were looking for it on eBay. So it was really difficult to maintain, not just difficult, very high risk to maintain the size of the business on that type of a platform, let alone put another layer of ambition to scale and grow that business, right? So that was a big factor. And as I said, the second factor was just the fact that business would go through a transition of co-manufacturing model or a tolling model, and people would operate that on pen and paper, it will take 6 to 9 months for processing systems to catch up, right? So we were really in a place where business was moving at a much faster pace than the whole process and technology landscape can keep up with.
Right, right. Yeah, it sounds like a good problem to have as an organization, but still a problem. It's an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely right. I say this a lot that for us, we did this at the time of growth, right? Which is a good time for companies to really look into this. We didn't do this at the time of hardship. We did this transformation at the time of growth. And it's kind of like, some of the East Coast folks will use this phrase, right? We changed the roof while sun was shining, right? So
right.
It's definitely a good time to do that. From my perspective, I think it's a better time to do these types of transformation when the business is doing well than to do that when, you're in a bit of a hardship from a financial perspective.
Right, right. Couldn't agree more. So what about the transformation itself? Tell us a little bit about the scope of what it is you ended up doing. You talked a little bit about where you're at and where you started from, but what was the kind of lead us down the path of how you started down that path of the transformation?
Yeah, so we are a very vertically integrated company, right? And that means, think of it as majority of the product that goes into your finished goods are homegrown. We also have a fairly strong arm of logistics operations. So when you look at that, us as a vertically integrated company, we really attacked all aspects of that vertical integration and the value chain, except for sales and marketing. So we really went after, start from sourcing, finance, planning, good chunk of manufacturing, and customer service, your order taking and logistics. So we really took on, I often say that we replaced the backbone of the company. We didn't touch anything of sales and marketing, be it direct to consumer type of initiatives, be it CRM initiatives. We had things running in parallel, but we didn't bring that into the scope of this transformation.
Right. Got it. So tell us a little bit about the specific technology you deployed and sort of how you got to that or arrived at that decision.
Yeah, and I think this would be a great point for those that are in the market thinking about this, right? So when we took on this type of a journey, there were many in the marketplace from a technology perspective that we can really anchor to, right? There's not just one company. And we did a couple of things. So one thing we did really well was we brought in an outside perspective, completely technology agnostic, not having married to a specific technology, and really used them to help us understand what is the market space like, what are some of the pros and cons, what are the best suited vendors from a technology perspective that really matches us from an industry complexity as well as our growth ambition and our natural ambition to do this once for the next 2-3 decades, right? So it was very important that we partner with someone that has strategic trajectory to where we want to be, but at the same time has a very good fit to our complexity and our basic needs of today, right? And we went through a very deep exercise. We spent about 1 year preparing ourselves in selecting technology, selecting implementation partner, and really preparing that internal team, be it from the C-level board executive all the way to individual contributor, not just identifying them, but really shaping them and getting them ready for this transformation. In the end, we selected SAP, and with it, we also changed our fundamental strategy in terms of being, a best of suite rather than best of breed. And we selected SAP as our technology, but we had many others that we looked at. We looked at JD Edwards, we looked at Infor, we looked at Microsoft, various.
Right. And what was it that led you to SAP? Was there anything in particular that really stood out or that was particularly well aligned with what you were trying to accomplish with this transformation and just overall as an organization?
Yeah, I would say a few things, right? So first and foremost, it's there, and this goes back about 4 years, right? So this is a phase where we were in about 4 years ago. So 4 years ago, they were very, very much, very heavily invested in taking their core ERP from ECC into S4 space. So we saw a lot of strategic alignment to really transform ERP for the future and continuously transform that ERP for the future in that space. So again, we saw SAP as a company that has a high investment from an R&D and from a product perspective for continuous evolution. We also saw them as more centric when it comes to product portfolio. It was a company that had less product than Oracle when it comes to ERP. So we found a bit more focus as a company. Outside of that strategic pillar, I would say scale played a big role. So given that we are very vertically integrated and we have a high growth potential, right, and ambitions, the scale played a big role in terms of selecting someone that has proven to be operating in very diverse marketplace, right? I joke around and say SAP is used to build rockets and tissue paper, right? So go find your space in between, right? So we found that diversity to be very appealing, right? And the last but not least, we've had a tremendous work done leading up to this transformation in identifying, how to connect that vertically integrated company from a process perspective. So we really have a different process when you're blending the product versus when you're making the product versus when you're sourcing some of the raw material. And we found that it was possible to lift that type of a process work we did into the technology that SAP was bringing to the table.
And what about some of the complexities of being a beverage manufacturer? Was there anything along those lines that, you're a high volume beverage manufacturer, a lot of different brands. You mentioned acquisitions you've grown through, so I imagine you had maybe some disparity in terms of how the operations worked. Was there anything that really stood out or that was sort of either a sticking point in your evaluation of potential options or led you to SAP?
Yeah, for sure, right? So when I think about the agility with acquisition, that was a big component. How quickly can we integrate the acquired company and its processes? So we found that agility to be available with components like central finances and whatnot in SAP. Though we are a company that really operates with a philosophy of integrating first rather than acquiring and then, lifting and shifting and keeping them on as it is. So we found that to be fairly a strong component from appeal perspective. And then I think the most important, though it's not true today, after 2 years we've learned a lot more, but at the time we were very confident that the blend management component of our industry and our business was very well represented. There isn't a system out there that does this. And we found that SAP had the basic principle to create that type of process manufacturing component using their tool sets.
Right. Yeah. We actually had another client a couple of years ago that made a comment. They're in a similar situation in that they were growing very aggressively through acquisition. And I remember them saying, which it was the first time I had heard this, or heard a client say this, was that of the acquisitions they did, some of them were using SAP and some of them weren't. But the ones that were using SAP actually were more flexible, and they felt like they had more flexibility to change their operations than the ones that weren't using SAP. And a lot of times SAP has this, people have a perception of it being extremely rigid and hard to change and that sort of thing. So it's interesting to hear that. It sounds like that may have been a similar experience for you in that you got that agility, you got the flexibility you were looking for with the product.
Yeah, and it's a double-edged sword, right? So if you look through the lens of a C-level, if you look through the lens of the business as a whole, right, it is definitely a platform that opens up doors for flexibility when it comes to operating model change, when it comes to integration of M&A, right? You can stand up a company very fast from an integration perspective. You can stand up a new operating model fairly quickly. And we are one of those companies that probably had every variation of operating model you can imagine, right, when it comes to tolling or co-manufacturing and things like that. And we found that to be very, very easy to configure and operate in. At the same time, it's not something you can deploy overnight or deploy, over a week, right? It is a system that has, if I want to add a new plant or if I want to add a new manufacturing location, it's not a click of a button, that drives that type of speed, right? So like I said, it's a double-edged sword. You definitely get the flexibility of operating model, agility of integration, but the people that have to actually do the work, they do spend time, right? It takes weeks to configure the system such that it operates right for you.
Right. So if you had to summarize in this, I'll ask you sort of a summary question, and then we'll take a break, and I'll come back and ask you more detail around this. But just at a summary level, how would you summarize the results of your transformation? I mean, how did it impact your business? Where are you at today?
Yeah, I would do it in two ways, right? If I compare us to the industry, I think from the execution of transformation and what we accomplished, I would put us in the top 5%, right? We were, you often hear majority of the ERPs and transformation fail. So I'm happy to say that we were in the top 5% of the success from that perspective. When I look back and look at the business goals that we had in mind, we've definitely hit the macro goals, which was reposition the company to scale, make it easy to scale, make it easy to operate globally. All of that we've hit. We had a big miss, in my opinion, in two areas, right? One is user experience, right? We went in with a very strong ambition, especially with things like Fiori and the innovations that SAP had lined up, to really elevate that user experience to be more modern, mobile type user experience. And I think we've missed the mark on that, and it has largely to do with the way the product is maturing and evolving. And then we've missed the mark in certain area of our business case, right? So we expected tremendous amount of efficiency in areas like sourcing, and we've not achieved that yet. And again, it has to do a lot with the way that the maturity of the tools are, and as well as in planning, right? So those two areas we're behind. We haven't fully gotten there. But outside of that, like I said, if you look at a macro picture, achieved the projects in time, well under budget, really good success from go-live perspective. Overall, companies being able to scale fairly aggressively post-go-live as well.
Right. Good. Well, good. Well, when we come back from a quick break, I'm going to ask you some more questions about how you got there. Maybe some of the good and the bad and the ugly of the journey itself, and how you handled some of those challenges. So we're going to take a quick break. We're here with Tarak Patel, and we're going to continue our discussion here after a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Okay, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. We go live every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. UK time, and 11 p.m. Hong Kong time. We go live on YouTube, so be sure to subscribe to us there. You can watch us every Wednesday there, or you can subscribe to us on any of the podcast platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, whatever your podcast of choice is. And we're here with Tarak Patel talking about a large SAP ERP business transformation at a food and beverage, or actually a beverage manufacturer. And we were, right before the break, Tarak, we were talking about some of the two shortcomings you had in this project. On one hand, you said it was top 5%, went really well overall, but two things you could have done better were the user experience and the business case, or the benefits realization within that business case. But if we back up even more and look at the actual journey itself, not so much the end state, but just how you got there, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced? What were some of the roadblocks or pitfalls along the way?
Yeah, I would say, as any transformation would face this, for us, the number one challenge at the start was to unify and unite the company, right? I think it's utmost important. And one of my early coaches used to say, aligning your sponsors and setting the right expectations, not just at the top, but across the company is very important. And for us, that uniting that voice in the company was perhaps the number one challenge we faced in the beginning. After that, just like any transformation, we face challenges from various aspects, right? So one is, when you get into these types of transformation, you're working with multiple vendors, be it your software providers, be it your implementation partner. The next challenge was really to make sure that you keep them in sync and you create a culture of one team where all of them are working for your benefit and not pointing out individuals' risks or flaws. So that was a second challenge I would say we faced. And a third, which I kind of talked about in my results, was just the gap, right? Throughout the journey, you're going to learn things that you didn't know, and you're going to find things that you didn't expect, right? So we definitely found plenty of those gaps where our expectations were not meeting, and adjusting to those gaps and continuously keeping your, company, your executives, and your teams aligned was probably my third biggest challenge that we faced.
So let's go to that alignment concept, with your executives, your stakeholders, but also your software vendor and system integrator. How did you achieve that alignment? What did you do to overcome that?
Yeah, so I'll speak in both aspects, right? So when you think about unifying the company, for me, it's very important that you have a strong why, right? People need to know why you're doing it. And there has to be a very strong, alignment on that why, right? So we spent quite a lot of time in shaping why are we doing this, in making sure that every executive that was lined up to this type of transformation understood why we're doing it, and we were getting, what they expected out of that transformation vision, right? So we spent tremendous amount of time aligning that, and I was very fortunate to have a CFO at the time who was a very strong sponsor. And I would really advise people that are out there to look for such executive sponsorship. Our CFO really took this upon himself in so many ways, right? And really didn't just, sponsor the project from distance, but really sponsor the project by being in the weeds and being with us as we were shaping that. So that played a big role. The company also made some very interesting changes where it unified the leadership under one responsible for this type of transformation, right? So that was also important. That the executives were reporting under one sponsor, right? So that was very important. The owners of the company took a very active interest in making sure that we're aligned on why. So to me, that played a big role. And as I mentioned in the beginning, having a software and SI agnostic party that helped us that brought us together at a next level was very important. So for me, that goes a long way. I think that sets you up for 70-80% of your success.
Right.
The second aspect, we were really strategic. You'd be surprised how much leverage you have over your SI and over your software company when you're buying and when you're in your negotiation phase. So we were very strategic to request very high executives from each of those companies to be part of our steering committee, right? So we went as far as asking for board level members to be in our steering committee, and we were successful. And that opens up doors for driving that strong partnership between various parties that are engaged and involved. And the last piece, which is very important for me, was, we never treated this transformation as something that a partner is going to execute on our behalf. We had a very clear mantra that we are accountable for it, and we lived it in a day-to-day basis, right? So anytime we suspected a risk or we suspected an issue, we would really take an active approach to work that through multiple parties that were involved, bring them to the table all at once, and really treat it as this is a company problem and we all need you to, roll up your sleeves and solve it for us.
Right. You're hitting on a couple really interesting points that I think a lot of companies miss, a lot of organizations miss during these transformations. I think a lot of times companies make two faulty assumptions. One is that my system integrator is going to lead this for me, and I'm going to outsource this project to them. And the other is that, this is a project management sort of a project team sort of project that needs to be executed at the project team level without thinking about what do we need from our executive team up top, what sort of top down sort of direction and alignment and unification, as you call it. What is it we need from them? And I think a lot of organizations are almost afraid to do that because being a top down command and control type of company isn't what people necessarily want day to day, but you sort of need that. Even though the trendy thing is to be more of a flat organization and more, collaborative, and you can still maintain that, but still having that clear direction at the executive level is very important. So I think those are both really good points.
Yeah, and I would say, you hit a key point. It's involvement and ownership at that level is equally important as well, right? We were really fortunate where we have a culture of inclusivity. I mean, I've had C-level executives sit in a process. I wouldn't say process design, but process overview session, right? And they would ask for it. They would ask to say, "Hey, show us how the new order to cash process is going to be different." And it's important for executives to have that level of passion, engagement in these types of programs as well. And I often joke around and say, you have to bring the gods down to the earth if you want this to be successful. Whatever works for you, whether it's monthly, weekly, but they have to stay engaged and at least take full interest, both from how the future is shaping as well as how people and morale of the people is doing.
Right. That's great. That's great advice. Sounds like you've had some good mentors and help along the way too.
Absolutely, it was a great team.
Yeah. So, what about organizational change management? When you think about the changes and the impact that this transformation had on the business, what sort of challenges did you face along those lines, and how did you address them?
Yeah, again, I would say it's often an area that's underestimated or overlooked, right? I would again say a lot to do with just the fact that I mentioned. We had sponsorship that really recognized the challenges that come with ERP and the business transformation. And from the very beginning, we were very clear that this needs to play a good and important role. And to many people's surprise, my counterpart, typically the ERPs are set up where you will have a program director from IT and a program director from business, and then you'll create a two-in-the-box concept. We, from day one, structured this where my counterpart was from HR. The individual had a lot of experience in operational excellence and also manufacturing space prior, but was very keen on creating the right culture for the program, driving the organizational change management for the program. So we put money where our mouth is, and we created that two-in-the-box leadership with someone that came from HR and had a tremendous amount of manufacturing transformation experience, but had a huge focus on making sure that we create the right team, we create the right culture, and we keep this from communication, training perspective, and forefront of the organization. So that played a big role. We also were very strategic in hiring an OCM leader. We were lucky to hire someone that had 12 ERP under their belt. So that played a big role, right? And we were very clear that change management is, in my opinion, equally important as any other tenet of that program. So that played a big role. After that, right, we simply followed what many methodologies exist out there in the marketplace, but we followed a very strong change management methodology. We were like you mentioned, we were in front of every executive you can imagine in the company, whether you were part of the program or not, at least once a month, once a quarter, keeping them appraised on what's happening, what's not happening. We operated with a very strong culture of transparency. We used to say early bad news is a good news. And we would, post all of our progress, good, bad, or ugly, on all of our walls, made it very transparent, both inside that epicenter where the program was operating and outside. in terms of how things were going, right? So those were, I think, the key tenets for what made our OCM successful in the program.
Right. That's great. And you're right. A lot of organizations do overlook that, but it sounds like you had a clear strategy, tool set, methodology, and support to address that.
Yeah, and this is another good area of ownership, right? We encountered fairly strong challenges early on. Our SI methodology for change management, their approach, and the way they were integrating their change management with the culture of our company was not very well aligned, right? And very early on in the program, we made an active decision to say we will own it. And the partner that I had was so strong, right? We were able to say, look, we will own that change management with the staffing that we have, the philosophy that we have in a company, and the leadership we have. And we took that in-house and we ran that ourselves. So again, very important to have a good strategy, good people that can really back up that strategy from an execution perspective, a sound methodology, and a clear focus on every day, every hour of your program.
Right. Now, what about the overall implementation time and budget? How did that compare to the actual implementation results as far as on time? Were you on time, on budget, or did you have any sort of discrepancy or adjustments you had to make along the way?
Yeah, on a big picture, we hit our targets. We used to, and this is also an important factor in your success. I would advise every company out there to re-evaluate your incentive structure and make it specific for this program, right? So we did that. We went through a complete change on how the people, every single person in the program from top to bottom, are incentivized. And in summary, we delivered, above target, both from time and budget perspective. From a program point of view, yes, we were on time and on budget. But as executives, we knew that these programs don't go on time and on budget. So we had at least given some latitude for our people to hit their target, right? So we were on time, we were on budget. We executed this top to bottom in 18 months. I can't share the number, but sure, it was very expensive program, just like any other company would encounter. But overall, in time and budget, our business case, it took us about a year to realize. And like I mentioned, in all areas except for, I would say, sourcing, we're realizing our business case.
Right. So it sounds like you did, despite the pitfalls and the challenges and things you had to work through, just like any transformation, it sounds like you guys ended up in a good spot. You had said that you feel like this project was in the top 5% of projects out there. If I'm a CIO or a project manager or an executive or business owner that's about to go through a similar transformation, what sort of parting words of advice would you give to them to help them achieve that same goal of not being a failure, not being an underwhelming success, but more of a one of the top performing transformations? What's the advice you would give?
Yeah, I would summarize some of the points that we discussed early, right? Spend your time preparing yourself, planning yourself well. It pays off, right? Jumping in it too fast is not the right way to do it. So spend your time planning, and it's really about aligning your executives, making sure you go in with a realistic business case, right? Benchmarking yourself with an outside world is not my favorite, but know what's possible. Of course, benchmark to know what is out there, but know your own success, right? So define your own success, align your executive, prepare in terms of making sure you have done your due diligence from the products that you're going to select, from an expectations that you're aligning. And then most important, right, invest in your people. Make sure you line up the best talent, the right talent. And then last thing I would say is be ready for surprises, right? There's not a day in this transformation that will not give you a new surprise. And be ready for that level of flexibility, agility. Create a culture for your team that can, go through that type of challenges and surprises, right? Founded on teamwork, commitment, transparency. It's very important to create that type of culture. The last thing I would leave for the people that are looking into doing this is if you are in that leadership role of that transformation, whether you are a sponsor, whether you are a director executing it, create proximity to your team and to this project, right? It's important to know people that are working on it, work that people are doing on a day-to-day basis. I think that goes a long way to stay close to that project at all levels.
That's well put, and it's really sound advice, especially because so much of what you're suggesting and recommending is focused on people. People, culture. You haven't talked a lot about the technology itself, which I think is interesting and fascinating, and I agree with. By the way, you're focused on the right things, and that's probably why you were one of the rare breeds of successful transformations out there.
Yeah, Eric, I've heard this so many times, and even though we've had some pitfalls, it's proven again that technology is the least of your complexity in these transformations, right? You have so many other facets that are much more complex than technology. In our case, you kind of said it well, right? Or in our case, if I look back, my biggest challenges were technology because we did the other things so well, right? And when I look at that challenge from a technology perspective, it was really around setting our expectations right? We had an Ariba product from SAP, and we internally marketed that as an Amazon-like experience. It is not Amazon-like experience. It is different. So it's important to calibrate what you're going to get and align your expectations. And then we were also very early adopter of some of the emerging technology like IBP of SAP. We expected a lot more out of it than what we should have, right? So that's also important to make sure that you assess that well. After that, the implementation to me is not the real challenge from a technology perspective.
Right. That's well put. That's a good place to leave it. Well, I appreciate you being here, Tarak. These are very interesting observations, and really appreciate having the opportunity to learn from your experience here.
Hey, I love giving back, so happy to have this chance, and thanks for giving me the opportunity, Eric.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control and more guests. We'll be right back.